Start streaming. Do not start Minecraft. Okay. Alright, so what do we got to do to set up here? Did you want a link? Because I am, like, streaming video.
Sorry?
Do you want a link?
Sure.
Or it doesn't matter?
It doesn't matter.
Like, yeah, for now. For later, like, I can stream the tabletop and all that. That's what it might be useful for.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah, because I kind of want to be, like, able to talk directly to you and just share screens, shit like that. Because it'll be easier to navigate conversation this way.
Yeah. Sharing screen. That was a helpful bit in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool.
Yep.
So,
all right. So, cheers. First of all, I can see you have a glass. I got my hand raised as well.
Yep. So hopefully this will turn out to be a much more a casual dev meeting, but also maybe perhaps it might be more focused because we are just talking to each other right now and we are not streaming to a public audience.
Awesome.
Yeah. However, we are recording.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning. You laid down on me your idea here, because that's the part that I think I need to get caught up on.
Yeah. Well, I guess this is the continuation of the theme that started to emerge about halfway through our live streaming sessions, I guess, which is where I started to try and drive towards recording a model schema. And so my intention right now, I guess, is an extension of that. So this pulls in the idea of like triad protocol of the temperaments, of the temperament triads, as in execution, commitment, protocol, constraint, and so on. And so looking at that, assuming that is somehow showing us the way towards mind mapping in a way that can facilitate the guild. So that's the explicit objective here, facilitating the guild using mind mapping, however you want to say it. Yeah, so as we kind of briefly brought it up, that this deck schema chart, I guess I'll put it on the cam, which you can't see, but you know the one, with the colors, and you've got the beginner, intermediate, and advanced deck schema.
Hold up.
You pulling it up?
Yep. Give me some share screen capabilities, please.
Yeah.
Let me know.
Okay, so security. Participants may share the screen. Congratulations. Yeah, so I see your entire screen right now.
Aren't those wonderful? People and their art. Yeah, so you see that, right?
That's the one. So I'm just seeing if I can get your screen into a more manageable window here. Alright, actually I can
probably just
go
give the whole
to
screen.
desktop. Yeah, so I just went to I shared my desktop, which is now your shared desktop.
Yeah, should be.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my thinking here is that this is what is going to give us the like kind of strike point into that technology, that cognitive technology of mind mapping. So I'm assuming. So the only thing is, this chart as it is, where we got it from, the temperamental triads, these are much more to be perceived at, or understood in a more immediate sense.
Hmm.
Um,
So,
and what I tried bringing up is, okay, but we also need to map hyperstitious objects. So we're not
yeah.
just tracking the moment, but we are articulating the dream as well.
Okay. So the articulation of the dream is what we would refer to as the pure potential, right? It has that's what would have the absurd structure.
Right.
That
Yeah.
that's where it becomes relevant to note what the archetypes are, what
Mm-hmm.
the archetypes are for, blah 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 blah.
Yeah, and it's all in the
Yeah.
context of this moment,
Hmm.
and yeah, and so I think this chart is also gives us another dimension, or I guess, or dimensions on that whole subject.
Yeah. So what I'm basically, I guess, suggesting is that somebody who is, say, devotional beginner, right, is going to be led by somebody who is advanced and full or full model like, or percept,
Right.
and in particular perceptive. So this is the top down meets. It's kind of like it is top down, and it is the most topmost, hitting the
Yeah.
the participant stage in terms of,
So
well,
I
diving
see
in.
right away you've gone into bootstrapping, basically. So you're saying, so you've kind of gone away from the, this chart is just a description of the moment and what's happening and that kind of related stuff, to this is what happens when you are a beginner of devotional temperament, trying to use this deck. Normally somebody is going to be teaching you that deck
Hmm.
technology and mind
Yeah,
mapping technology, and it's going to be part of something bigger that you're hooked into.
right.
So that,
So
yeah. Yeah.
while you're at the bottom, if you will, of this commitment, you're kind of sitting in. Note what you've got circled as well. I don't think that's an accident. You've got only commitment and execution circled, where the narrative lands in the receptive mode. So what that's the top down. Um, that's that's the provision of a potentially isomorphic map that's going to get recorded through the commitment via execution, right?
Now, sorry, I just got lost in my train of thought here for a second. Looking at, you said the top row as perceptive, which is how I marked it, but that I think can actually be said to be the extremes. Like, so back to the eye chart, the extremes. In other words, the temperaments which are more connected to the moment, and that's kind of something I tried to describe
The
last night
narrative.
or the night before. Yeah, the narrative process phenomena. Um,
Hmm. So
so
what I'm
perceptive and academic temperaments are both a sort of treatment of the moment. Do
Yes,
you see what I'm saying? And so
yes,
that topmost thing could be seen as perceptive, okay, but also
linking it down.
as academic. I think I'm just throwing that out there. The top, as in the top of the triad, this is your also your mimetic, right?
Yes. Well, I don't think that's relevant to what I'm trying to say.
Right,
It's like
but I just wanted to point that out as valid. Hopefully, just a thought came to mind. Sorry, continue with where you're going.
what I'm where I'm going with this is that the master is sort of leading the participant here in a devotional manner. So what that means is that the execution, so the isomorphism between phenomena it has to happen between phenomena, process, and narrative, and the commitment and execution coming from the top down from that narrative that is supplied to the beginner.
Did you say an isomorphism between phenomena, process, and narrative?
No,
Or what did you say that was?
between that triad as a whole, and the commitment and execution that you find in the beginner of the process.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying there? So the beginner is handed the narrative, which happens to be isomorphic with process and phenomena, and the execution and the commitment record needs to be isomorphic with that narrative. And this is
Okay.
how we take the hyperstition down to the concrete layer.
Sorry,
Does that make sense?
I keep having other thoughts that I want to. So I need to write some things down, like as we're talking, because um, I seem to be getting
So
derailed.
okay, here's what you need to visually picture, and stay with me. So look at the entire perceptive circle,
Yeah.
right? Now imagine phenomena and process getting squished and collapsed into narrative.
Right.
So now, like, the entire perceptive circle is sitting in the narrative
Yes.
bubble,
So in other words, you're told
and then
stories which help you to align with the upper layers without knowing
right,
about those, why it's
right,
working.
and then the job of the beginner is to execute and create a record of commitment that is isomorphic to that narrative. And so this is the interaction,
Right.
and this is like the start, so to speak, of the process.
Right. Yeah. And so that's like the same as saying the narrative is like what you're kind of mapping and sharing, as in different myths about how to do this or that
Exactly.
archetype.
Exactly, and you want it to come from the perceptive because of the initial collapse of the circle into narrative, which means bringing phenomena and process into the loop, like like ringing
Right.
them in
They
and
just will,
and just
yeah.
push
You don't have
and
to
then
know why
pushing
it
them down.
works. Right.
Exactly, and then pushing them in, and so which is why that ends up being also a devotional circle, not just a beginner circle. This is
Right.
where faith is most pronounced.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's how I see that.
So, okay, so this is one of the ideas that came up into my head is that, okay, we need to be storyboarding every last scenario, because what you just told me is one scenario, right? Okay, mastery or master and beginner interact or participant interaction, master participant,
Yeah.
right? And so that's coherence protocol, but the coherence model, right, that we use.
Yep. So you're just writing it down on paper right now?
Yeah, yeah, and just as that's a side note, I guess, for if we decide to publish this or parts of this, which we probably will.
Yeah, yeah, it's fine.
Probably will.
Like I said, I'm not against that.
Yeah. So, like, so I see what you're telling me, but now, how do you use cards to mind map and facilitate this?
So
And let's acknowledge that there's also a core that we're trying to bootstrap the guild. That's one thing, but then there's all the things that can be articulated within the guild, right? Like the social
so
operating
proximal.
system details.
So the proximal stuff.
Yeah. Right.
All right.
Yeah.
So one of the things I mentioned is the bootstrapping of the cards themselves in terms of, okay, well, you have conversations, you have these posts or commentary of
Right. So this is
that
dashboard.
provide, yeah, that provide sort of the branching out possibilities. Then you have the from which you can derive all of the different constraints and protocols to go
Wait.
along with
So
that.
dashboard has conversation, broadcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
broadcast. What else again?
Workshop, and
Literature or no?
yeah, yeah, it's something like that. Um,
So yeah,
so
so you were just mentioning something. How does that relate?
well, for one, the meta schedule itself is provided by the literature, the slot,
Right.
right? It's
Can you walk through what you were telling me the process before I kind of interrupted and started writing down. Um, it's along the lines of conversation, broadcast, workshop, etc. But you said a different sequence of words. Do you recall the intro to that? Because I remember it was part of the discussion about this, but uh, I'm drawing a blank on. Oh, I see you're muted there too.
yeah. Give me a second. I gotta walk my wife out. She's going to work.
Righto.
Okay. So where were we? Can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello.
Hey,
Hello.
what's up?
I see what happened. Yeah.
What did happen?
You didn't have your headphones on, so you didn't hear me.
Oh, cool.
All right. Apparently, I've been arrested and stalked again for some reason.
Oh, like muted or banned?
I said hello, and then that appeared.
What?
So
I'm not
so
looking at your screen. Okay.
so I'm going to respond with a sad face because this is sad.
Oh, true. It's you've been arrested by a burb.
There.
Oh. Ugh. Ing.
Mhm.
Good job. It's very depressed. Look.
Let's get rid of that. I got this going in case we want to be starting to actually map anything.
Cool.
And
I set my video private, and it turns out I can't share that with you unless you're signed in, maybe. But
oh,
I can't even get my monitor working because it says you have to sign in. So
right. Okay.
doesn't matter though.
So
We don't need to see that.
right, we're just going to be putting. This is for images, so. All right.
Yeah.
So we have this. We actually have this handy if we need to talk about it.
Or the eye chart, yeah. Sweet.
Yeah. So what we're seeing here is obviously a jump from here to here, but not in the sense of. So this is like your personal jumps, right? It's not from what do you call it? So a perceptual would jump to the devotional, to the pragmatic. We're not talking about the devotional being taught here. This isn't what those arrows represent. But what you would know, what you would see, what I am seeing anyway,
Yep.
is that they're both from top to bottom, and that's the kind of the affinity of them, where you want somebody perceiving something from top to bottom to be told something from top to bottom, right? Like you want that sort of big picture first interaction on both ends.
Yeah, exactly. Matching. That's the ingress matchup.
Yeah. So and it's not an accident that they're this close together because of that, where the extreme happens to be the master and the middle happens to be the participant sort of role. Yeah. Even the side chart diagram is kind of showing that by having two extremes in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, always relevant. Let's see. Got a lot of weird things here. So what else do you think is relevant?
We were just talking about dashboard, and I was trying to get you to reintroduce the topic because you said something, but I can't remember the exact word. It's so a parallel of the conversation, broadcast, workshop,
Right.
etc.
And so what you would
literature.
have,
And you
yeah,
were saying no, but conversation, and then you have something else,
like a
not
post,
broadcast or something different you were talking
like a
about.
post. I was talking about a post, a posting,
Yeah,
a
well,
thesis.
that's what a broadcast.
statement.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all parallels of each other. With the point being is that it's like one giant dump of information, right? Which can
Right.
then be further scrutinized with commentary. So it's like a
Yeah,
different kind of conversation.
meta-analyzed. I know the purpose is to capture a bulk, but you're capturing things that are relevant that you're going to be looking back to later that you
Yeah,
want to review.
and as you can imagine, like doing the commentary leads to conversation about other, or leads to other conversations, which leads to other dumping of information. A single write-up with plus commentary could lead to the next write-up or version of the write-up, and so on and so forth. So it has this progressive network of essays, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that.
And that kind of is the narrative.
And so, like, to uh, just quickly to bring this scenario in, which we'd plan to do, I like to try to use the idea of a community garden as an example of a
Yep.
proximity guild.
That's what you
Also,
meant by shovel in the sand, right?
yeah, sticking a shovel in the dirt. Where does that
Yeah.
actually happen? And so, um,
Well, so all
yeah,
of that
sorry, I
can
had
be
a point, but it
applied.
kind of lost me where I was going to go with that.
All of this can be like rehashed, but for that scenario now. There's phenomena,
Right.
processes, and a
Okay.
narrative outline that outlines the garden.
So I remembered what the part is. So, like, let's say you've got an established guild going that's a community garden guild, um, and so there's ways of doing things. Let's say you had a couple seasons already under your belt, collective belt, like say 5 to 10 people, all doing gardens together or something.
All right, so you have a
Um,
commitment record.
and yes, exactly. And so this is also not just every man for himself, but there's a higher sense and actual organization happening between the gardeners, right? So that's the guild we're talking about.
So this is the
And then
entire agile economics
so
scenario.
the scenario is, okay, everybody, I did X thing,
Get
and
down.
it completely, like, it fixed our problem that we're having. Like, say there's a problem comes out, people are
Mhm.
having the problem, and so one of the gardeners figures out, if you do this to fix the problem, like, let's say there's a pest and somebody finds the exact, like, remedy for a pest, right? And
Mhm.
they're the only one using it. They've tested it on their part of the garden, right? So then
Mhm.
the idea is, how do you um, record this and put it into protocol format so it can be shared over the network, as
So this is
this is the protocol for dealing with this particular pest. Like, so this
right.
pest problem introduced, and the
So
protocol deals with that. So how do you
so that
share
would
that?
be the layer right past the essays. So
Yes,
the next
exactly. So this I'm
format.
proposing as our scenario, quote unquote,
Yeah.
for,
So that's
let's
what I
actually
was calling schemas.
write it down.
So that's what I was calling a schema. So
What
basically,
part of that does that signify?
it's a schema card. Like um, you would basically create a structure, right? A
Right. So,
data
okay.
structure,
So yes. So by
a
schema card,
semantic one.
you mean you're talking about policy, essentially, in within a guild, that, so there's a bunch of people are working together to make a higher organizational structure, or a shell, around these
Mm.
gardens, for example, and this something
See,
gets lifted up into the schema, that this is how the things work.
yeah, if this, then that. If that, then this. So it's like a mapping of names to what happened to algorithms.
Right. Yes, and we have the
And each and
heuristic
it,
format there.
right. So each name is a signifier of some sort of event, right? And the algorithm that's supposed to be based on, like, this condition is that this is the algorithm, and that condition is this algorithm, and this is where you get into the next phase of the dashboard of putting it all together. But the normalization of all schemas is going to be event, conditions, actions, event, condition, actions. So
Right.
all of these schemas are going to be feeding that cycle of one schema. It's a very specialized schema, right? At the end of the day, that says
Yeah.
how to process other schemas.
That you are um, taking in sensory data, which is what gives you the event. You're
Mhm.
applying
A
optionally a
heuristic.
set of other conditions other than the fact that you just saw the event, and then instructions of what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um,
So you got
so
to. This is why you have to have the whole full bootstrap somewhere tucked in the back of your mind, at the very least, to tackle the garden. So you can assume that you have those in your narrative, right? So the bootstrap is collapsed from phenomena and process into the narrative. And now another set of phenomena and processes regarding gardening itself is also being collapsed into the same bootstrap narrative.
okay, so you're talking about collections of narratives which are used to download the ecology or the environment or whatever.
Exactly. Like, so knowing plants, knowing your soils, knowing your tools, etc., knowing what you want out of the plants themselves.
Right. Okay. So yeah, we know that we're bootstrapping a whole bunch of hold-ons, basically.
Hmm.
Uh,
Including the bootstrap itself, that's the
yeah.
core
Okay.
of it. Of
So
it.
we know we've got a map of hold-ons that we need to be taken care of. What does this look like? Like, practically, how are we actually communicating this to each other, aside from just words right now? But how do we write it down?
So in the beginner stage, that's not a concern, because if you'll notice, according to the Venn diagram that we're looking at, that is not coming from the beginner. That is supplied by the process, which is supplied through the perceptive master, right?
Huh?
So we collapse.
I kind of
We,
followed, but if you can
so
restate.
so we yeah, so the perceptive circle gets collapsed into the narrative that pushes down from the top onto the beginner.
Right.
So at that point, at the stage of the beginner, the process, which is what brings constraint and protocol
Right.
into the mix, is not
Yeah.
supplied by the beginner. It's supplied by the intermediate who starts to learn that heuristic, which
Right.
is why the bubble expands
Yeah.
rather than moves. It
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
just moves; it expands.
So, in other words, you're pointing to the fact that the beginner is agnostic about the higher level processes, and we're able to expect a very
That's faith.
simplified
Yeah, yeah.
schema.
It's a faith component in the process. This is where you need to trust your master. Like this is the heuristic by which you can assert if some master is trustworthy. Are you expanding the bubble into the constraint and protocol after the fact? You know,
Yeah.
um, and if you don't know what that means, you have a shitty master to begin with, as well, right? Like this is the kind of stuff that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be handed down.
Yeah. Uh, so it, the experience looks different from the participant perspective, the beginner.
Yeah.
So the full game is not shown to them. So the game is unfolding in stages, if you will.
Now, let's not make that a concrete like rule or anything like that. There's always an oscillation between phases of being the beginner, being an intermediate, and being advanced, even despite not knowing the specifics. Because
Okay,
this
true.
is the internal human experience to begin with, and we're all basically masters of ourselves to some extent, whether we know it with words or not, and regardless of how awful the intuition regarded it might be.
Yeah.
There's always
So
a sort of oscillation there. So we don't want to
good caveat.
that a beginner is strictly confined to never knowing a constraint or a
Right.
protocol
Okay.
or a concept or a
Yeah.
program.
So it's a great caveat, and it's basically the one that never try to pin anything down, and that's
Mhm.
not what we would ever be using this system for. But to articulate with the expectation of feedback and all that. Um,
So what this means is that like a probabilities field, like a scattering a scattered electron or something to that analogy, it will mean that the highest probability would be to find somebody who is a beginner within the main commitment and execution framework. It will be
did you
much
say
more.
domain commitment and execution?
No,
I didn't
within
hear what word. Oh, within, right.
within the
That
commitment and
framework.
execution
Yep.
framework, and then you will find that that cloud of probability is more expanded with the intermediate, right? Because not only are the commitments and executions are being provided, but also the commitments and execution are going to be about manipulation of constraint and protocol themselves.
Right.
So they're going to be
Yeah.
integrated explicitly, right? So
Which
in the
is more like
it,
semi-timeless and
yeah,
cultural, social.
yeah. So the expansions of these circles really all talk about what's implicit and what's explicit yeah, in the framework, but never. But we also need to see it as the full model happening at all times.
Yeah. Right, and that comes back to the initial point that these this chart where it came from is basically an in the moment analysis. Like it's all there always, right?
Okay, yeah. Well, that's a different point about the moment. In I guess that I haven't covered before. But yeah. This is
Hmm.
closer to what's happening in the field manual. Actually, if you'll notice, this is following a very similar path that is outlined in the field manual of become a casual and
We would expect that, and that would be awesome if we could line that up. I didn't think about it.
no, what we've described so far seems to be lined up already. So if we reread those paragraphs, we might actually
Right. Okay,
catch that.
one point I wanted to make is that when saying like, okay, the game is played like this or that, um, and back to that point that we articulate to for feedback to re-articulate and re-articulate. So, and this is one of the major difficulties of articulation, and something that's going to keep coming up in every card that's written. Um, is that it's okay to just write something down, even though, and it never will be perfect, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so just because we're creating a game and saying these are the rules, that never means that these are the rules of your experience as the person who's reading that instruction manual.
So this actually is a great point, and why it brings me right back to my original bootstrap and why it needs to be that way. Those messages in the conversation, right? Like we
Mhm.
start, I pointed out the query being one of them, right? But what you just said is exactly another example.
It's key. It's critical, and it's also not, that understanding makes it much easier to talk to a live audience because when you can assume that they know that.
Yeah. So yeah, it's so conversation is actually fundamental, and you don't want. I don't think we want anything to happen above conversation without conversation. Like I don't think I don't think that that's uh, isomorphic, simply because that's actually a removal from the moment instead of acknowledging that the moment as the primary constituent of the from which everything else
Right.
flows.
Okay. Yeah.
So the
Because
conversation is a
everything is a
capture.
conversation. This is a point I thought
Ultimately,
to
yeah,
bring up before that we didn't make explicit, and sometimes we talk about it. But
yeah,
the conversation of the person talking to dirt with a shovel instrument,
yeah.
right? That's you're speaking a language. You're having a conversation with dirt. It can be recorded. It can be
Yeah.
represented, right,
This,
in
this
various
speaks to
ways.
the this speaks to the carrier
It does a
framework.
recording. The dirt is physically changed,
Right. That's the commitment record.
right? And
And
yes, and that's what I meant by more imminent of a thing rather than a
huh.
commitment as a
No, no,
hyperstitious object that's
no. Notice another connection here. Sorry to
yeah.
interrupt. It's just
Hmm.
before I forget it.
Good.
So we have the hyperstition, that's the narrative. We have the commitment record, which is the aftermath,
Mm-hmm.
right? And shit, I'm already trying. I'm already forgetting it. This has to do with. Okay, never mind. If I'll remember it
You'll get it.
like spontaneously as I forgot it.
Yeah, so this is a tough part about so using a chart like this to talk about something, it has so many different interpretations. Like you can see it in so many different ways, like whether it's the immediate commitment of something or whether it's having a commitment understood more as a hyperstitious object that hasn't yet committed into the medium, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
There's different
exactly.
ways of interpreting and using, and I think with the deck protocol and all that, the Zettelkasten game, um, the we are more interested in that case on the hyperstitious side of it, where you're having a special magical little environment set up to cause these commitments to commit in
Okay.
all
And
aspects.
I can speak to that again visually based on this image. This has to do with again the perceptive circle collapsing to the right.
Mm-hmm.
If you just keep imagining it formally collapsing to the right and sucking upwards and everything that's underneath it as it goes, like imagine it sucks up the programming concept into phenomena and moves to the right. Sucks up protocol and
Yeah.
constraints into process
Right.
and then moves to the right and then
Correct.
dumps that all into commitment and execution.
Yes.
Now, what are the implications of this image? Especially once you start to expand the bottom part from beginner to intermediate to
Yes.
advanced.
So
So
the
your
impli-
commitments and executions are going to now, sorry, I'm just trying to finish the thought.
Yep.
Are going to start now to also include protocol constraint, also include program and concept explicitly in them, but going to being sucked back up to into the through the narrative and expressed again over and over and over again.
Yeah. So I was just gonna say like a beginner program. Just because you're a beginner and you're doing something under constraints and instructions. You are running a program, even though you
Mm-hmm.
don't know what it is. It
Full, a
tells
full blown conceptual program, yeah.
right.
And
Yeah.
that brings us together with carriers and all that. And I think that was my initial thing that I forgot to talk about.
What you're
That was
looking for.
yeah, it was because it has to do with carriers, and I just forget what the point there was. Uh,
Carrier. Um,
it doesn't matter
so
right now.
you're having um, all these different programs running. So you're multiplexing this ability across many different carriers because you're having different agents running on different carriers and communicating interagency, right?
Oh yeah, that's definitely the structure. I just don't remember what the point of bringing that up was. It has something to do with conversion of the meta narrative into a commitment record, but again, it's kind of like
Right.
that's neither here nor there right now.
That's
Um,
hyperstition.
yeah,
We are mind mapping hyperstition intentionally.
yes, sir.
That's the isomorphism is a trying to write down reality before it happens.
Yeah, and then what feedback would entail is the comparison of the commitment record to the hyperstition and seeing
Right.
how closely did the actual resemble the potential. And that would be the heuristic by which
Right.
a quantitative the quantitative element of quality can be subjugated to. Like this is the only quantitative stuff that actually really matters, and it has to always be in terms of the qualitative elements that produced uh, uh,
Right.
the need for this quantitative assessment.
Yeah.
So we're talking about like a what's an example of that? Something to the effect of liking a certain color over another and therefore making a different atheistic choice within one's own framework of living, and simply enjoying that more qualitatively after the fact than before,
Mm.
which happened through a quantitative change in the environment. So
Right.
quality affects
Yes.
quantity,
Correct.
top down sort of relationship. And this is why I think this is why I personally think that a lot of people feel that quality supersedes quantity, and where we differ on that
Mm-hmm.
position specifically by saying they are two sides of one
Yeah.
coin in terms of
It's a
energy dissipation and in terms of energy absorption.
typical fallacy or whatever you call it.
Yeah. Well,
Pitfall.
to be fair, we are in a typical fallacy as well by building up a system. And if the short circuit of it is not recognized, it's never going to be useful.
Right. On that note, do you want to take a break for 5 minutes?
Five, maybe
Hit the
less.
washroom. Less? Yeah, I'll be back in like two.
Depends on my horse bladder.
Right? Okay, buddy.
Cheers. I'll
Uh,
be right there.
Yep, yep. So we are back. We're back, ladies and gentlemen.
There's one caveat I wanted to mention that is very much worth keeping in mind. So
Sure.
we're talking about beginner and master, right? And
Right.
what I want to point out is that this doesn't have to be a relationship between you and somebody else. This could be a
Right.
relationship between an idea and your engagement with it, right? Like it could be an entirely
Mm-hmm. Good
self-contained
point.
mental process that doesn't have to be with another individual per se.
Right.
So the point is
And how would you know it's a worthy master?
by the commitment record being mapped properly to the hyperstitional narrative that's being provided.
And there being evidence that that actually unlocks something for you.
Well, it would require actual observation and
Yeah.
feedback,
Yeah,
and
that's what I mean. Like,
it's
you could have
actually an
any
engagement with the
arbitrary
process.
narratives, and yes, the
Hmm.
isomorphism could be there, but you,
Oh, you mean what would lock it down to something that what would ground it?
yeah.
That would be part of injecting it with the artificial meta narrative, which is like exactly this one. Interestingly enough, so by having the process reflective in its structure, or rather by having the content of the process being reflective of its structure, aka injecting the bootstrap, um, which is injecting this mapping explicitly, right? The way we're discussing it right now
Mm-hmm.
is what grounds it. It becomes self-referential about itself, and you know that um, the isomorphisms have to uh, all line up. So when you start to introduce, so let's put it this way: you start to introduce heuristics that don't necessarily contain isomorphic elements, right? The whole structure begins to destabilize and begins to be less and less useful,
Hmm.
right? Like
Yep.
it is self-constraining in the sense that it's either an all or nothing game. And that's actually also what makes it a very difficult game to adopt.
Hmm. What do you mean all or nothing?
I
Because
mean, like
things
if
can
you,
go very wrong for very long before they actually fail.
well, that only indicates that there is a lack of observation and no commitment record that is asymmetric, right? So one
Mm-hmm.
way or the other, that's an introduction of entropy and a neglect of maintenance, because the sustenance components and the maintenance components don't line up. The whole holonic structure of the organism begins to break down, and
Mm-hmm.
it is an ailment, even though it may be asymptomatic a little. Even asymptomatic disease is a disease for a reason, right? It's damaging something.
It's interesting that eventually, in watching, say, your own body decompose from maybe like you know that you're not treating it right, that teaches you that there are consequences, I guess you could say, just by the fact that the problems, like say you have back pains or this that because of lifting improper or whatever, and that doesn't leave you, the pain stays, right?
Yeah,
You
and
know,
that's basically
and this maybe teaches you a lesson that somehow, like deep down, I don't know, like that you can do something about it, right? And pay attention and do feedback.
well,
So
that's the
start listening to what your body is telling you, in other words.
right. It's basically the systemic fiat of nature itself, rather than any kind of
Yeah.
mechanical system.
Yeah, which that's an interesting signal. It's your body giving you something that persistent or whatever. Until you deal with it, maybe you figure out a cure for it, right?
Yeah.
But it can take that moment, that breaking point where you're like, you've had enough, you can't take it anymore, and you have to change.
Well, pain is the signal about change. It is a signal of change direction.
Yeah.
Pain is not an evil that must be avoided. It's a
Right.
signal of something is not right, and a change of direction must be taking place. And that's actually the problem with trying to numb pain is that the signal gets ignored, and what causing the pain isn't
Right.
being dealt with.
That's also tough because some people have chronic pain that medically there is no known remedy, right? Which that can
Yeah.
be a whole different thing to deal with.
Well, that's getting the body to a point of no return.
Or maybe it was born that way.
That's getting the
Just
body to a point
nature.
of no
Yeah, it
return.
was already, yeah, um,
Whether
insanely
it's
challenged in certain ways. Yep.
yeah, whether it's by like personal action or the other creature action, whatever have you.
Right.
So yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So back to the gardening example,
Good.
we can
Yep.
we can assume that the bootstrap that I was talking about, like this has to be conversations, this has to be broadcasts, blah blah blah, or theses and
Right.
schemas, and then the meta schedule itself. So now let's suppose we're in a scenario where you and I know this, so we know it's built in. So whatever, say you're teaching me gardening,
Yeah.
whatever it is that you're including your phenomena and processes as you supply me with a narrative, by definition has to involve the bootstrap, like or whatever the
Yeah.
bootstrap is implicated.
It has to
So,
be presented in a way that interfaces with that an
so the,
isomorphic
so the
mind map.
yeah, so the first thing you do is instead of talk about conversations, you have a conversation instead. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that's implied in by the conversation in the meta line, whatever the bootstrap itself.
Right. Yes. And so this is this reminds me of like the fundamental guilds and all that, like membership.
Yeah.
This the you just talk to people assuming the way
Hmm.
that it is.
So we can assume that a conversation is going on, and your question is, when do we put the shovel in the dirt? Well, we assume there's a conversation.
Please do not excuse me.
We assume that there's a conversation to which this question belongs. What's that conversation about? Okay, lots of stuff implied, but whatever is implied, we can now make a post about and and explain it explicitly because we can think about it because it's been said.
Right. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Uh,
And then that brings out like the background stuff into the foreground, and you analyze the background as the
yeah.
foreground that changes your
Context is everything.
yeah, exactly. And so you
I
do this
understand that. So the shovel in the ground question is more of like a rhetorical question about how what does this game actually look like being played in such a
it's a,
situation?
an implied question within that question is, how should I answer this question? What's the correct answer?
Hmm.
What's an incorrect answer? Because you can say today, I can say tomorrow, but what's the difference between the two, right? So there's like the question itself opens up a lot of implications about its assumptions.
Sure.
So you analyze the
Yep.
assumptions, you explain, you commit to, you then start to commit to explicit ones. That's You're creating a record of what you've committed to. So if you've committed to this one, and this one, what does that feedback look like? Right. So you can actually use commitments in potentialities.
Do you mean by committed to as in something has already happened?
So you analyze your question, you bring to light all of the implications, right? You
Yeah, I'm sure I know you're talking about just meditation, which is what we should
you
just
then
do.
yeah, then you choose a set of commitments out of all of the options, analyze it. So you've now analyzed the record of commitments. created a new element for your next meta schedule. You can then move off to another set of commitments, analyze them, and now you have two
Yeah.
parallel records of
Okay,
commitments.
so again, we need to
So there's
storyboard
so
this.
there's so there's an interaction of a hypothetical record of commitments, which is in the hyperstitional sense, and then there is the actual record of commitments of doing that job.
Right.
For I did it for this one, I did it
That's
for
what we've
that
been
one,
talking about. Yep.
and so that's the more concrete element of it. But then, because you've done this and you've done that, the next thing that you could do based on those analyses gives you that many more options, right? And so you can either analyze an option or pick
Right.
the next phase.
Yeah, you're talking about
with an outcome.
feedback.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
It's all good.
that's the point, and this is what drives the engine of the guild, is that you keep taking in. So you're recording what happens, but you're meta analyzing it for like process information
Right.
that which can be shared.
Basically, yeah. Out of those, you take whole conceptual programs and you feed it into the phenomenological framework, understand the processes of that, understand the protocols of that, derive them explicitly, back and forth and back and forth and back
Yeah.
and
So
forth it goes.
again, we need to storyboard this. Do you know what I mean when I'm saying that?
Well, yeah, sure. But now that we know what we're storyboarding, we can
Because
start.
yeah, like we keep telling stories, but we're not, like, we are recording them on audio, which we can go back to, but also we should record them in paper, document, whatever format.
So you do that if you want to do paper.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool, but do we want to dive into any particular thing like that? That's what I'm saying. Like, just we're kind of skimming over the
That
top,
that would
but
be
we're
your
not filling
call,
in.
and that would be your call by driving it with a question or with, because I can only think of so many
Yeah,
things.
I appreciate that.
Like, and I'm going to be down.
Um,
I'm going to be stuck mostly to the structural pieces, so that I can build up what you're describing from them. That's how I want to tackle this. So I'm going to try to tackle it from bottom up, as you try to give me something from top down.
yeah, right. Teamwork.
Hmm.
Classic Portal Mountain teamwork protocol.
Yeah. So, to reiterate, the entire bootstrapping process can be implicit in the proximal feedback loop, right? Like your phenomena and processes that you're jamming into the narrative presuppose certain phenomena and processes from the bootstrap.
Right. It can be that can be intuited. You kind of feel like
Well,
something
you want
bigger
to you
is
want
happening.
you want it to you want to see it as something that's organically growing out, right? As like a plant, a rooted plant.
Right. So I'm getting like the idea or the feeling like that we're describing something so generic and like undifferentiated whole and like pure potential, like just all these archetypes. Um, but I think I have this feeling like we're going to end up having to make some compromises to solidify it into instructions that can be just taken up by the public, for example,
Well, have examples
like
of
as a
those.
game product.
We have examples of those with, say, taking the breath as the main need for the reflex and overlaying that. Um, we just haven't articulated it to the full extent that we could, but I think it's in the
Right.
same boat. For example, it's a very solid
Yep.
bit of um, work.
Well, we called it the linchpin exercise for a reason at one point. Uh, so other names which I prefer, I guess, but
Hmm.
yep.
All right. So shoveling dirt. Let's go. We're still there.
Shovel
That's
the
the
dirt.
shovel the dirt narrative begins. That's the what. Where are we with commitment and execution when that's the narrative?
Hmm. Well, you. How did you get to that point? Like,
You asked the question.
yeah.
I'm looking at this picture. I've collapsed my perceptive bubble into the narrative, and in conversation mode, the artifact of the message artifact of when do we put shovel in the dirt is hovering up in the meta narrative.
Right.
Now, I'm sitting there, a beginner, trying to understand what to execute for my first
Yeah.
record of commitment.
Yeah. So this is actually a good scenario. So this is the garden scenario we're talking
Yep.
about, and the beginner knows that in a garden you typically have dirt and a shovel at least, and many other things, but something special is happening. They don't know what it is. So when you put the shovel into the dirt, it matters how deep are you going. It matters what you're doing with the dirt itself, right? And depending on what you're planting or what your purpose is at the time.
Does the kind of
So,
dirt matter?
uh, um, yes.
Like, can I just like use sand?
um, so
No.
no, yeah. So like whatever we're recording, it kind of depends on, okay, are we bootstrapping a new garden, or are we showing somebody an existing one?
So what does that question really tell you? It doesn't have context.
Yeah, context matters.
So,
Yes. So you have
but
all
that,
these scenarios for different
but is it?
context.
But is it? But what the context is that this question doesn't have context. So, commitment should be, what should we execute now? Having this very basic understanding. If we just keep going by like the structure of this diagram, the next thing we just go. It's an algorithm, right? The next thing we just should do is execute the next query. What's the context?
Next query. Sorry, I'm fucking with.
Yeah. If you need to record if you need to record it as a list of steps, then by all means, this is the whole point of the exercise.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. What we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm. So we had a query. When should I put in the shovel into the dirt? A cloud of information came out of that saying, we don't know this, we don't know that, we don't know this, we don't know that.
Yes.
We then analyzed this cloud of information and determined that what we're lacking is context.
Yep.
So we executed that and our record of commitment is the realization of the lack of
Yep.
context. So we've done two things in our commitment record.
So you're actually just describing the current what we're recording actually on audio and video right now.
This is
Correct.
This is the exposition of the actual meta schedule as it would work. This is how it would function.
Right.
So now we have a record of commitment with two entries: query for context. So
Right.
what does that question
Correct.
open up?
Yep.
Now we're going through the same process, and also all of these answers to these questions, those will be posts, right? When we ask the question when to put the shovel into the
Right.
dirt, everything that we said to answer that question isn't the message back. Those are just floating ideas in a cloud of abstraction as posts that we can comment on.
Right.
We can then look at those posts and come back with an answer with a question of it, what is the context? So that's part of the conversation, whereas all of that went out to all the posts. So far with me?
So we're having like the narrative chain shaped like the snake or whatever, uh, one after another, right? Like we're describing something through time.
Yeah, sort of.
Uh, that's what we're keeping track of, right? But then, so let's say the answers to a query, there are many of them. So at each point, you're having kind of like a burst of, like if we're trying to record uh, or
Right.
mind map what's this scenario right now is happening,
Yeah.
we're going to find that things keep exploding out, but then progress and then explode and progress. So uh,
So
this may be
explode and
related
contract. Yeah.
to, yes, that phenomenon of the pure potentiality and then can strain into the
Yeah.
next moment through that.
Yeah. That's exactly the same phenomenon. It's not, and the model will show its shape in all of these things. Like it's never going to
Right.
be a different elemental
And
structure or anything
it's
like that.
interesting that we see this like in a fractal sort of view, in that it's coming out like what we might write down is actually things that happen. Like say you might write one per minute, one event sort of happens per minute, but meanwhile your actual perceptions in the moments is things happening like changing and changing and changing.
Well, the moment itself feels eternal. There's two ways to look at it. I'd say this is probably the only piece of wisdom that OmniQuery ever brought to my attention
Oh yeah.
with his calculus stuff,
Right.
where he was talking about like having a single point on the line, and whether it's the point moving on the line and the line is stationary, or whether the point is stationary and the line moves through it. So like there's the two perspectives. Like when the point is stationary, that's being in the moment,
Oh,
and
is
that
this?
is
Yeah, this is just the. Yeah, I get that metaphor.
yeah.
Through time as a line, but then like kind of like the cosmos at each moment, slicing
Yeah.
through it.
Yeah, so you can have like both perspectives, and those are the same as abstract and concrete. So it's the same set of um, isomorphisms.
Yep. Is your building on fire?
Oh no, something's on fire. Where are they going? I think they did turn this way. Yep, definitely going down my street,
Oh
but
no.
they're not stopping.
Who knew?
Um, yeah.
Cool.
Um,
Yeah, so we're seeing that phenomenon going through space and time.
yeah, I don't think we would ever see it in a different way either. There's a reason why those archetypes are what they are. But besides that
Right. Okay, so
point,
part of facilitation is to, I think, storyboard like this. Like often in a meeting, uh, you'll have somebody on the whiteboard writing down what people are talking about, right? Kind of keeping track, and it can sometimes it can kind of have a spatio temporal uh, uh, like a chain of image areas, right? Like we talked about this over here for 5 minutes, and then like we moved over to this area and talked about it, right? Like you're writing
yeah,
down.
yeah. And this is the same phenomena as again we have the what are the elemental archetypes again? We have consolidation and decay, right?
Right? Space and
So
time.
yeah, so decay would indicate like how the query decayed into all of these different potentialities.
Right.
Which way is the which way the lightning strike could go? And
Yeah.
then, as each potentiality is assessed in its own, right, in its own special little universe, if you will, in a bubble universe,
Yep.
pretend the lightning strike went through there, pretend the lightning strike went through there, pretend the lightning strike went through there, pretend the lightning strike went through there. Now the lightning strike went through actually doing all of these lightning strike potentialities, right? So we've actually had a commitment of doing all
Right.
of that, which presents itself with a new set of information, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that set of information is what drives the continuation of this lightning strike that went through all of that, and which one of those little sub strikes is going to be driving the rest?
Actualized.
Yeah, if any, or
Right.
are we stopping with dead cold center there because there's nowhere else to go?
Yeah, sometimes it's limited on your imagination
Yeah,
when there was a solution that couldn't be found.
yeah. Like there's no saying that this is a guaranteed job. But do you see like the product how it's like again, you get a fractal sense here. Like because you're
Yeah,
going
of
through all
course.
these potentialities within a potential space of their own, and then after the fact, there are still potentialities. So you have to build something out of them to on top of the fact that you've just run through that program. So like it's all feeding right back
Yeah,
into itself. And
of
again, this
course.
is where the complexity really, really, really starts to
Right.
pick up.
I think it's important to keep track of the scale on which you are doing this loop, um, because as we spoke earlier, it can happen on a very immediate scale. In other words, moment to moment, as in somebody meditating on their actual existence or whatever. And
Yeah.
then it can also the fractal this fractal pattern can be seen at much macro and larger time periods. And
Well,
this is, I think, where in the hyperstition stuff comes in, right? Like where you want to be talking about something that happens far out into into the future.
yeah, well, think about the fight or flight response where it's all those possibilities are brought to you right now, and your only option is to either select one real quick or be stuck not being able to.
Right?
Yeah, I
That's
don't.
a good example of it in the moment. How the lightning strikes, so to speak, um, in that your experience up to that moment of decision has shaped what your decision actually will be, and not based on like you're not like a computer sitting there calculating every single option like a chess computer, but you are simply reacting to the most strongest path which emerges out of the collision between your own sensory input and your model of what's happening.
So this,
Right.
because this is the top, the sense archetype is that sensory input,
Yeah. Yeah. I
and
guess I'm.
the collision would be between it and the sense making component, the soundbite component that says this means that, right? And the senses are feeding you a situation that is not that, and this is the dysmorphism we're looking at between the two.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I guess I'm trying to evoke as well, just the neural net, the emergent nature of the neural net, which is weird to think about.
Um,
Like from a rational point of view, from the mind's point of view, whatever comes up is all mind and rational. Like whatever you think about. But how did it come
mm,
up to that point? Is like
that's
an emergent, like paths through a forest.
yeah. This has to do with the entire incompleteness theorem, where in such a complicated system, a truth of a statement, even under meta-analysis of any kind, is going to show up as true by the virtue of being stated. So words made real, superstition made real, if you will.
Hmm.
And things like I am not provable by this system. You go ahead, you use the system to try to prove it. You fail, right? And by that failure, made the statement true,
Hmm.
right? And then there's and and now you can from this little tiny like pivot point, which this is what I would actually refer to as source,
Is that
the
image like
I.
super small on your screen? Like it's
Yeah,
taking up like a thumbnail.
it's weird. It's weirdly small. Yeah.
Hold control and scroll up I'm sure it's the right one.
Give me a sec.
There wouldn't be smaller images there. Just go back to that and hold control and scroll up. No, control. There you go.
Yeah. So because like certain things become reality from being stated, from the virtue of being stated. That's what this shows us.
Yeah,
Tr-
so this was a hyperstitious object, maybe, that
but it's a
realization
seed. So
statement.
this is the seed that is perceived as source by many people. The absolutist idea, it comes from the fact that it is a true statement when you go through that analysis, right? Like it's I am done. Like it's just a statement of truth in the sufficiently complex system. It will work with it, right? The
Right.
system it will become integrated into, and that's what we've been calling
But it
the
almost
self-reference.
seems like a moot point if the system you're referencing is simple enough, I guess.
Yeah, we're
If
not
it's
talking
so
about.
complicated that you couldn't
Well,
possibly
we're
test all
talking
the
about.
entire environment, then it's a
Well,
moot
we're talking
statement.
about complex adaptive systems, of one of which is the totality of mind. So we're not going to be able to get away with a simple system. We have to look at it in terms of a system that is completely so convolutedly complex that it contradicts itself at the end. It makes assertions of its that are true and false at the same time, and
Yeah.
all the jazz of paradox that we get to enjoy as comedy and as tragedy. But
Fair enough.
that's what builds meaning. This is where qualia comes from. I am is a qualia statement in the sense that you cannot arrive at it from axioms. You cannot arrive at it from.
Yeah.
It's because you cannot arrive at them from axioms and make them true by definition of that they
But
become a qualia and not a quantum.
how do you know that you can't? Or is it just in such a complicated
That's
system, how do you ever know that you can't? And that's my
that's
point,
that's the
that's moot.
Goodell's proof. Okay, if you want to argue that one, you gotta have to like, deal with his mathematics. Good luck.
It's fine.
But like, it is what he found, right? Like, it is the nature of the strange loop that drives the rest of nature. In that,
Yep.
what happens is because these statements are made on that level, but within the same system, right? Like they're true from a meta-analysis of the system, but but at the same
Are
time,
the
but at the
statements are at
same
least
time,
made in the grammar of that carrier at that
exactly.
right?
That's the key. The are made. So that means that they have effect on the semantic structure of everything that's attached to it, and
Mm-hmm.
hence
Yeah.
that being a
Right,
source
yeah.
kind
Right,
of
yeah, yeah.
appealing.
Okay, so this makes it not moot. So this is probably peeling into the actual depth of it
This is where you get a
through that.
discrepancy between mind and matter, kind of a thing. It is within the same structure, but you just can't tell how. The causality structure is gone. You can't do it. You literally have to
Yeah.
jump out of the system to even
Yeah.
see the truth of
Yeah.
it.
Well, we know that anytime um, uh, emerge a new layer, a new nexus or whatever, a new unit, you're losing that. You've lost causality. You're speaking a different language.
Yep. And yeah,
Shall
that's
we,
one of it.
on that note, take a break, or do you want to finish your thought?
No. This is a finished thought. We can continue on with
Good.
its utility after that.
Or we could, yeah, try to bring it back to the game and all that we're talking about.
Yeah, like that's what
That's
I meant by utility.
Yeah. Holy fuck, utility of that. Damn. All right, be right back.
Yeah, I'm like I told you, I'm going to supply the pieces from the bottom up so that we can take that and
Yeah.
build
Yeah,
the
yeah.
top
So
down.
let me try to steer us back to application. an expectation of the guild.
Okay.
All right.
So we'll be right back in a minute.
Yep. Cool. I'll just, unmute ourselves.
Yeah. You know what else we could do, eh? We
What?
could probably so we're already seeing relevance here. We're seeing by extension most likely relevance with that.
That's the tough part. There's relevance with dang near everything.
Well, yes, yes. It's just a matter of finding what we should take in, what we should skip for now.
How to simplify it, how to bootstrap the process of getting this thing going by focusing on the simple things first, maybe.
Yeah, and look, I mean, we're also seeing relevance with this, right? Because the guide, terrain, and direction stuff is where you get equivalence of narrative and stuff like that, and all that jazz.
Yep. Equivalence.
Which we should probably actually include here somehow. Like
what is that?
We should probably have another row above here that denotes the fourth triad.
Oh shit! And what would that be?
It would be based on strictly this.
It's the artifact. What you call it? The quest artifacts.
Yeah. So guide, terrain, direction.
It do be like that. Yeah, we could do that.
Just makes sense. It is the same thing, so.
No, you don't have it up on your desktop. The yeah. I'll just make a note. Add a row.
Yeah, it would be terrain, guide, direction. Sorry, guide, terrain, direction.
Guide, terrain, direction. Correct. Okay, now whether we can do that successfully or not probably depends on, or whether it makes sense depends on, I think, what we are going to pull out of this chart to make an actual game instruction manual type thing. So, yeah. um,
Just seeing if there's anything that could spark my
yeah,
inspiration.
yeah. So the idea that, looking at this chart that we had up, I can probably pull it up on mine too.
Which one do you want to see?
The deck schema.
Drag schema.
Deck schema. What? I thought I put it here. How could I not put it?
I got it up.
Oh, okay.
And I'm sharing. So.
Oh, good. Yeah. Perfect. You could scroll in one notch if you wanted to. Look at that. So,
Bam.
this chart is my cutting edge hope for creating some kind of schema. And like you mentioned earlier, schemas can stack, and some schemas just become inherent in whatever comes next, right?
Yep.
So
Implicit.
The main divergence here is that where this chart came from, it was talking about a much more immediate and momentary sense of the mechanics of perception, whereas when we are mind mapping, we want to extend extend that out over time, so that we're not looking at the direct, for example, record of commitment, but a expected record of commitment, right?
Right, a hyperstitional one.
Hyperstitional, and that's kind of the shift from this chart, which I expect to produce the schema that we would use for facilitating the guild. In other words, to talk to other guild members about structures and future structures and working together and protocols and all that.
So, I think that the ultimate hyperstitional bits are the program made up of concepts, right? So if you package the program up in terms of concepts into the phenomena, and then furthermore into the process and into the narrative, as you are relaying the stuff back down.
Correct. And then back
into
down.
So I think what you're going to end up comparing the commitment record to and the execution process with is the program that you are supplied with in that packet.
Okay. So what you've just described it seems to me to be exactly in line with how we've been talking about this over the last, say, 10 live streams or less, is that just
Lincoln?
looking at this structure of agents. So you've got all kinds of carriers and stacked carriers and layers, but you've got agents which are speaking onto those carriers with specific language. And I'm pretty sure that's what you were talking about, compressing that up and over and back down.
Can you just repeat that for me so that I was slightly distracted?
Yep.
I think you're on the money.
So you've got stacks of carriers that in any environment, this is what we're describing, including the fundamental guilds and all that. You've got the stacking carriers, which are from the individual perspective looked over by running programs we call agents, which are managing that particular area. Mm-hmm. So we're compressing this up, we're shifting it over, and then delivering it down to the beginner.
Yes, fiat. That arrow fiat.
So they are becoming certain agents.
Yes, absolutely. So there's that fiat arrow that points to the secondary agent that is receiving the resonance, right?
Right.
And then,
The car
and then on,
diagram.
right, and you can actually see the isomorphism in a technical sense by comparing the isomorphism climbing up the stack to the resonance of the isomorphism of the resonance itself. Is say the the fact of that resonance, right,
Mm-hmm.
occurring to
Yeah.
begin with. The question is how isomorphic is it to the vertical climb of the of resonance of isomorphism of the makeup of the receiving
Correct.
stack?
Correct. So you're delivering a series of fiat packages, which give the agent the capacity to express and speak language of its own stack, potentially. And this is the isomorphism of the
Mhm.
self stack.
So, what I'm talking about here, right, is this fiat line. So this is the resonance that we're describing between the two protocols here. So one stack is sending a packet over, right? That's
Right.
what the arrows show, um, which causes an isomorphism between the two agents due to the resonance in protocols between that underlies them. That's what we're seeing here. There's a resonance in the codings that are happening.
Protocol. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I haven't looked at
so
this chart in a while. It's
but
been a
but
bit.
but in an effort to
Okay,
but
so
in a
this is it. Sorry, this is a different thing than what I had stated and what I was thinking about.
okay.
I was thinking more about a fiat package being able to introduce an agent to its own stack, not just the protocol, but the actual other layers, like
Related,
different layers.
very
Right.
related, and let me
Yeah.
show you how.
Right. Yeah. This expands out to that.
So the fiat, the isomorphism, the resonance, they're happening at the top layers, right? They're happening at layers that are not in the underlying mediums that we're talking about.
Right.
They're happening, but there is the element of travel of the messages from uh, from one agent to the other through the medium in order to even make it there.
Right.
And that process has that vertical isomorphism where you're going from coding, decoding it into a protocol, and then that was what appears to agent 2 as as whatever is being sent via fiat by agent 1 to begin with. So that entire process of climbing the stack can be either isomorphic or dysmorphic, right? This is what we have in that secondary arrow going around in a loop over here around medium and carrier to just show you that you could either have an isomorphism or a dysmorphism going from coding to agent 2. Is that making sense?
Okay. Most of it, yes, but I was just fucking with my camera,
Okay,
so I
so
completely
my
skipped.
usual example is agent 1 tells agent 2 to drink bleach to protect themselves from COVID-19.
Right.
Agent 2 resonates with the message, drinks bleach,
Yeah.
and
Right.
dies.
Right.
So while there was an isomorphism horizontally via
Yeah.
resonance,
Yeah. Yeah. But what I was
the
talking about, that stack that I was talking about illuminating, has become completely corrupted.
yes, and I'm trying to give you the mechanics of
Right.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so the drinking of bleach caused from the process from coding to decoding to protocol to agency 2, aka its biological agency, to disintegrate, right?
Mm-hmm.
An absolute dysmorphism
Yeah.
and collapse of stack.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
So of
so this
course,
is what
you're
this is what I'm
illuminating the fact that instructions can be both good or bad, quote unquote, or isomorphic or
sure.
dysmorphic.
Sure. Despite the fact that horizontally they can resonate isomorphically, vertically they can be this, that, or the other thing. This brings us back
Right.
to this brings us right back to this diagram where we are trying to compare the commitment record to the narrative, the hyperstition provided by the narrative, right? And now we have a mechanism by which to judge
Right.
proper isomorphism, and that comes back down to the vertical isomorphism of the stack. Does the narrative resonating on the top level horizontally create an isomorphic resonance of the stack itself to which it's applied? Right? So, am I growing the plant or am I killing the plant?
Right. Or so from this chart, in that what you just said, you're kind of going back to that stack, like let's even say the neural OS stack. You know, having like physical layers and that. That's where you're kind of jutting out to that. I kind of followed. I think I followed.
So we're talking about like pretend master and beginner relation. Yeah, participant relationship. The master supplies the perceptive circle here, right? The participant supplies the beginner circle, and there's a fiat arrow going from one stack to the other. So the master is the one stack.
Right. Yeah.
The participant is the other stack, and now we're back at the car diagram,
right,
with that interpretation.
And this is interesting how this opens up again to the idea of mind mapping, and having the master area, what you just said, being this like hyperstitious object, and the job of the beginner to see that hyperstitious object and start comparing it to their own commitment record.
Yes. Notice that beginner and devotional are not separate circles as well, even in your own conception of
this. That's what it was, yeah.
So what does that mean in terms of devotional? Is that devotional has a faith involved, one without a necessary insight, one without necessarily the insight into the matter, but insight into the narrative enough to say it's worth participating in.
Yep. And you can get a lot from that. Like that can tell you all you need to know.
Like just having the golden rule in it is already like it's golden rule.
Right. Yeah.
Perfect 101 soundbite.
Do unto others as you would do unto yourself.
Right. Which sounds simple, but is impossible to unpack. Impossible. Like, try. Just give it a shot. Right? Like, as soon as you try to put it into a definition space and articulate it, it explodes into infinity. And none of it is exactly correct. Like, you can't do anything in exactly every context. It's this then, it's that then, it's the other thing then, and so on and so on and so forth and so forth. It's never going to be this one likable abstract idea that you
right.
want from.
I have a feeling like that within the model, though, we can explain what's going on every time you think about that rule. Like, or when you apply that rule to your memories.
Well, easy. Check this out. I think I know exactly what you're talking about. But correct me if I'm wrong. But let me just go back to my beloved car, and basically do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Let's translate this into model speak. Right there.
Yeah.
Make sure that this isomorphism between agent 1 and agent 2 and the isomorphism between a coding and an agent 2 are at all times sustained and maintained.
Right. And that kind of relates to that chart we just had up. You got the horizontal and the vertical.
Yeah, they have to be isomorphic.
Right.
That's again the same meaning in a different way about that isomorphism. Is that this has to resonate properly so that the vertical stack is self-maintaining, is sustained, is growing and whatnot. And this would be the relationship between self and other, But if you remember the earlier caveat, it could be between yourself and yourself,
Right.
which means that it could also be a nurturing relationship.
It's a great example of the golden rule. So, anyways, proceed.
I think that's all I had for it. So,
Oh,
but look, I just used it
wait,
as
go
like
back to
the one.
the other chart.
Yeah. The
Like,
reason I said the golden rule, by the way, is because it's the 101 soundbite, right? It's like the simplest one to agree
yeah,
to, and and
the car chart. Yeah, I guess that's it. But just interesting that so sound bites were given via fiat to from Agent 1 to Agent 2,
yeah,
and then they used that through time to compare with their commitment uh, record of commitment to in any moment see, okay, if I treat somebody bad, you kind of have to imagine yourself in their shoes of you treating them bad, right? And when you
yeah.
get treated bad, you have to imagine that it was just you doing something to yourself, right? And kind of why would you
How
do
that
this?
notice how it's implicit there, but if we analyze it, it's the same heuristic as being empathetic with the narrative and sympathetic to all artifacts. It
Right.
has the exact same effect, except not being explicit this time.
Yep.
And so again, all these meditations, all of these ways of going around about it, they're never going to be different. They're just going to be expressed in a different context, different expressions. This is really what it boils down to. But
Mm-hmm.
never the same,
Mm-hmm.
never a difference in activity, never a difference in fundamental meaning. There's not going to be anything beyond the holon, if you will, or the what we are. The entire ontological explanation is always going to hover around this weird
Right.
non explanation of just you're just an assembly of dissipation and consolidation and just dissipation and consolidation. And that's all you can ever recognize. So,
Yeah, it's weird.
but it's only weird if you are searching for an absolute.
Right.
If you let go
Yeah.
of the idea, it's not as weird. It actually makes
Correct.
more sense in that okay,
Yeah, yeah, I know. Yeah.
like all conscious moments might be like if you imagine the
It's
carrier,
weird from
right?
the ego perspective.
Of course, because the ego it lives within the expressions. But what lives between the expressions, right? And this is what people try to allude to as absolutes. However, in the
Right.
layer and schema, it's a nonsense. It's a nonsensical position. We're just talking about noise. There's never non-motion, and that's my
Right.
biggest intention. Like
Yeah.
I think
In all that's ever been experienced, we don't ever see that.
yeah, like extrinsic observation should not be taken for granted as simply mere illusion or delusion. Yes, it's dreamlike, but the fact that we don't experience anything outside of time, anything outside of space, should not be a matter of reflection
Yes.
about what that is,
And
as much as
reify it into a product.
yeah, it should be more because you can reify the opposite into a product by just being symbolic about it. That's the problem with solipsism to begin with. You just throw out the not symbol, right? You take a symbol, you take the negation of the symbol, you throw that in there, and there you go. Already you
Right.
made something out of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's precisely why absolutism is not the way because all is that's doing the same damn thing on
Yep.
on the most basic level. Anyway, I will always have a correct for that, I believe.
It's good. It's probably something good to preach about.
Well, this is the dividing line between
I mean,
where I would call somebody
yeah,
more of a charlatan than they would call
yeah.
me a charlatan and all of
And
that
to
jazz.
me, like when I think about that argument, and I think about like, okay, what ultimately matters is my experience, I guess, and how I'm feeling. And
No, no,
well,
no, 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 no. That's the mistake. That's the same Taoist mistake. That's the same.
No, no.
That's not what
Okay,
matters. What
I said it
matters is the
wrong.
context. What matters is the context of the plateaus, not that they can happen, but that they have happened, and that we are not sitting somewhere below the fact, and we can just reach quote unquote that spot. No,
I meant it
that's
as a
that's the men.
heuristic. I was trying. So
No,
let's
no.
try to differentiate
Sorry.
this. I meant it as a heuristic in that
It's the same reason why
when
I don't
you
like.
continually attach to identity, you keep getting lifted up into the dream, right? And that's kind
Yeah,
of what I meant by feeling like I don't want to keep being lifted up into the dream,
it's
like against my
it's a
will
useless.
or whatever.
It's the system that they preach works for the man who has never seen civilization to begin with. They would understand what that means. They don't
Right?
exist in our systemic
Yes,
world.
correct.
That is why we don't need more Taoism. We need more Buddhism, and I will explain that, qualify
Okay.
that. I will qualify that very
I
specifically.
haven't heard that narrative and I
We
appreciate it.
the reason the Buddha is the Buddha is because he wasn't there to be. He wasn't the sage. He wasn't the sage that gave you the truth about who you are or what you are or any of that bullshit. Reason being is very simple. He was not in the business of explaining what you are and who you are and why you are. He was in the business of healing you from a damaging system. He is
Yeah.
a response. He is an after the fact response. Why after the fact? Because we're on a plateau. You see, we've breached that line, and
Yeah.
that line is has no. There is no turning back past that. So no sage can talk to you from below a plateau that
Yeah.
you're on.
Yeah, I get it.
There is no message to be heard in it. The language is too different. This is why you
Yeah.
can never talk to God about God to an
So
atheist and
I'm
all of that
interested
shit.
about the Taoism comment that you said, like that it's kind of
One
like,
second.
yeah, yeah.
Well, the Taoist comment is that you cannot point out the way. You can
Right.
only experience the
Yeah, I
way,
know,
and
but
I
so
take issue with that.
this came with me saying like, okay, so my what I said was like, um, like I guess I'm just paraphrasing or whatever, but like it's the feeling of karma arising. Like, why would you keep wanting to put yourself in situation and situation? And this eternalism stuff drags you back into that dream, right? So and then you brought up Taoism. So I don't know if that's a good way of thinking about it or.
The Taoism and the Brahmanism are united in that they keep on talking about the ultimate truth, the ultimate